Hello, everybody. Welcome to this particular lecture. I can't really find a good place for my face. There we go. It'll work. Today, this particular clip is going to be pretty short. The video that accompanies it is fairly long. It's about an hour's worth or a little bit more, because it's another one of those really big people, just like we did with Louis Armstrong. Being such a monumental figure, and kind of took him out of chronological context and just kind of talked about him as one entity. We're going to do the same with Duke Ellington. Duke Ellington led a band, composed his own music, was one of the greatest bands of the swing era. But unlike a lot of the swing era bands that we talked about already, when the swing era ends, a lot of those bands, particularly the bands that were white, had white band leaders and played a lot of pop tunes. Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw's, those sorts of groups. A lot of those groups disappeared. Tastes change, times change, economic type circumstances change, which we'll get into as well. And so when that stuff disappears, most of those bands went away. But in the case of Ellington and a handful of others like Count Basie, which we'll talk about as well, but in the case of Ellington, he was able to keep his band together and on the road and constantly innovating for another 40 years up until his death. So Ellington is a unique sort of member of the big band club because he continued much further. Okay, he's also arguably the most prolific composer in jazz history. He wrote like 4,000 pieces of music for his orchestra, for his jazz ensemble, and dozens of obviously early on, starting with small, shortish, standard jazz tunes, pop tunes, that kind of stuff. Later in his career, he started to write extended suites, much larger scale pieces of music. The Afro-Eurasian Eclipse is a big, long piece of music. Black, Brown, and Beige is a suite of pieces of music, kind of all put together. There's all kinds of those things. He even wrote sacred music. He wrote a couple of, basically, for lack of a better term, they're jazz masses that are performed by his jazz band. And first one was commissioned by the Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, California, for a performance in 1965. You can find a lot of that stuff on YouTube if you want to check it out. So Ellington, extremely diverse, very long-lasting, legendary band and band leader, and this great variety of things, and sort of the ability to change and evolve and keep up with the times and innovate makes Ellington's band the one artistic band that we're talking about. So previously we had spoken about all of the popular bands. Ellington's band is the artistic band that we're going to focus on now. Okay, so as I mentioned, the most prolific composer and arranger in jazz history. Continually led bands from the earliest days in 1920, when he had like a society band, kind of like Fletcher Henderson, or kind of like the group that James Reese Europe would have used to accompany the Castles, a early society orchestra. Then it evolved into a jazz band, into the Duke Ellington Orchestra, and that continued again up until his death in 1970. Okay, he started out actually. He was from Washington, D.C., and put a group together. Eventually, it was Duke Ellington and the Washingtonians, and they moved to New York, where they got a gig at the Club Kentucky, eventually landing a gig at the Cotton Club, which was the premier speakeasy in all of Harlem during the Prohibition era and afterwards as well. So radio networks would bring microphones into the Cotton Club. They would broadcast Duke Ellington's band nationwide. So he was heard in this really prolific time. He had to write music for the shows. The Cotton Club was known as a Jim Crow club. It was in Harlem, and everybody that worked there was black. The entertainment was black. Black band, Ellington, black band, black. The singers, the dancers, everyone's black. The service wait staff, the chefs, probably black. Everyone's black. The employees were black. The clientele was white. The clientele was wealthy white elites from Manhattan would drive uptown into Harlem, and they'd go to the Cotton Club to see these exotic shows featuring exotic dancing, by these African American dancers, and that was accompanied by some exotic sounding music that Duke Ellington wrote for these shows. It got the nickname, as you can see here, jungle music, just for that reason. So it's not very PC, but that's what it was in the early 1930s. And so Ellington was known as the greatest composer of jungle music. And so it kind of, in a backwards looking sense, it's very much sort of a continuation of a minstrelsy tradition where you are working in stereotypes, African American culture being very primitive, being very exotic, being very carnal, that kind of stuff, when in fact none of that is true. None of these people were, directly off the boat from Africa. None of these dance routines were African. None of this music was African. But it was all to paint a picture for the wealthy white clientele. Okay. So yeah, radio exposure. They brought in a microphone to the Cotton Club. Got plenty of that. He also worked his way into films with the help of his manager. So Duke Ellington was very well known and was a giant star in the swing era and beyond. Okay, so the video clips that I've shared with you are it's quite a few segments, and it's pretty long, and I think that does a really good job of sort of giving you the diversity of Ellington and painting a good picture as far as that goes. I want to talk about a couple of extra things, and I've uploaded a bunch of Ellington tunes for you to kind of listen to, just to get a taste. Duke Ellington is our artistic band, but he could do and did do everything. Extremely prolific. So, for example, if the public wants straight ahead swing tunes they can dance to, well, Ellington can do that, and he did. He wrote lots of straight ahead regular swing tunes. A really good example of that is a song that he worked with his writing partner, actually a guy by the name of Billy Strayhorn. Billy Strayhorn wrote Take the A-Train, and that was performed by the Duke Ellington Orchestra. So I've uploaded Take the A-Train. I want you to listen to it, check it out. Just a straight ahead, swing dance, swing tune that they would do the Lindy Hop to or something like that, right? Also good ballads, nice romantic sort of beautiful ballads, like a tune like Solitude, also uploaded for you. I uploaded a tune called Caravan, which is sort of fitting the exotic realm. It actually was co-written by Juan Tizol, who was a valve trombone player in his band. And it kind of has, it's supposed to paint the picture of like a caravan of camels crossing the desert. And it does a pretty good job of that. And again, very sort of exotic. Duke Ellington wrote specific pieces for specific members of his band. If you have a band for 50 years, some people stayed with him a really long time. Some people kind of came and went after shorter durations. But to a lot of the musicians, and if you're going to write 4,000 tunes, Duke Ellington wrote specific pieces for specific members of his band. For example, there was a trumpet player named Cootie Williams, and Cootie Williams was the plunger specialist in the trumpet section for quite a while, meaning if there was a solo that required the plunger to go wah, 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 like that, then it went to Cootie Williams. There was a plunger specialist in the trombone section as well. It was just one of the many textures and unique characteristics of Ellington's music. Well, he wrote a piece specifically for Cootie Williams. It's called the Concerto for Cootie. And while Cootie Williams was in the band, they played that tune. As soon as Cootie Williams left the Duke Ellington Orchestra, they never played that song again. You couldn't just hand it to the next guy. So the next guy comes along, and another plunger specialist enters the band. So Ellington would eventually write that person his own piece. He was very much about writing not just for a trombone or for a saxophone, but for a person, and that person's individual sound and the characteristics and style of that person. And that is another thing that sort of separates Ellington from everything else. In those popular bands, whether it's Artie Shaw, Tommy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, if you played third trombone, you could bounce from band to band to band and it wouldn't matter, um, because you were playing the music that was written on the page and nobody got hurt. But in the Ellington Orchestra, it was about obviously your sound and what instruments you played, but the personality you bring to that sound, and they weren't interchangeable pieces. Okay. I had mentioned the concert style, the extended works, typically with less improvisation. A good example is Reminiscing in Tempo, that was also covered a little bit in the video. He wrote some very orchestral, sort of impressionistic works. There's a type of music from the turn of the 20th century in French music called Impressionism. And Ellington, not necessarily trying to copy that in any way, shape, or form, but came up with his own sort of ideas. I uploaded a tune called Translucency, which has a really unique combination of a muted trombone and a voice playing the melody. The voice is not, there are no words, so it's not like a text that is sung. He uses the voice as a color, as a sound, and it blends beautifully with the trombone, and they play together. And then sometimes they kind of pull apart and do a duet, and then they come back together. It's really a lovely piece, really interesting sounds, one that you would not get in particular from just about any other group. Benny Goodman's not going to play this. Tommy Dorsey's band is not going to do this kind of stuff. So Ellington, again, extremely original. And I mentioned the concert music as well. So I've uploaded a bunch of these things just to give you a variety. With 4,000 songs, we can only give you a tiny slice. But I want you to know that just because he's an artistic band, or the artistic band we're talking about, and this composer and arranger primarily, that doesn't mean they couldn't write pop tunes or swing tunes. I mean, Duke Ellington wrote "It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing," which was a very popular pop tune from this era as well. So go check out all these things when we're done with our little discussion today. Just listen to a handful of different ones and kind of wrap your brain around the diversity that was Duke Ellington. To get back to that other point about particular artists, particular musicians in his band, and songs that were written for him. The Black and Tan Fantasy was written for Barbara Miley. The Concerto for Cootie was Cootie Williams. Those were just two of dozens of trumpet players over the 50 years, and lots of them got their own specific pieces. Johnny Hodges, who played alto sax for, 40 years of Ellington's career, he had multiple tunes. One would have been like Prelude to a Kiss. I have not uploaded all of these tunes, but just, again, things to think about. Tenor sax, Ben Webster was a longtime presence in the band. He had a tune called Cottontail. In the trombone section, you had Tricky Sam Nanton, and he was featured on Harlem Airshaft. Lawrence Brown is the guy featured on Translucency, which I have uploaded. Juan Tizol I also uploaded as an exotic tune, right? Featured on Caravan. He did have his writing partner, Billy Strayhorn. Strayhorn joined the group, and the two kind of thought as one, and they wrote music together. That was then played by the Ellington Orchestra, Chelsea Bridge, Take the A Train, and that kind of stuff. So again, the big takeaway from Ellington, from our little brief discussion here, and all the music I've uploaded, and the film clip, is just the amazing longevity and diversity of the Ellington band. Even when Ellington passed away, the band actually continued for a while, run by Duke Ellington's son, Mercer Ellington. They just kept it going. Eventually, it's the 70s, and it sort of fell out of favor, and it stopped working. But to be able to have a band and keep it on the road for 50 years, or keep it working for 50 years, is an extremely big accomplishment, and one of the reasons why Duke Ellington is such an important presence in American music. Okay, so that's really it for Duke Ellington. Again, there was a lot of stuff earlier from popular bands. So I'm trying to keep the Ellington clip short in particular, and there will also be one on Count Basie coming up, which I will also try and keep a little bit on the short side. And that'll sort of wrap up the swing era. So You guys have a lovely afternoon. All right. Listen to all those great examples of Duke Ellington music, and I will catch you next time. All right. Thank you. Bye bye.